I listed the many institutions and museums that had sprung up over the last 200 years, and also mentioned how these buildings eventually would seem to become parodies of their own dogma. What I didn't mention was their original meaning, especially toward how art was viewed. If you visit any museum today, you know pretty much what to expect. It doesn't really matter which country you are in. They all have a format, the purpose of the space to lay out the relics and art of the past and present, in order to place in a setting whereby the object can be understood, taken out of the cacophony of its real-life context and placed within the context of its own relative era to enable understanding. The historical museum format in Europe, for example, was initially designed with regard to categorising objects either garnered from around the world through colonisation or gifts to or from within its own country. The idea being to understand the places and context of artefacts so as to give them recognition and also to enable study about such places as and when it will be necessary for future mediation. This approach having its legacy in the plunderous nature of war and the gathering of booty, to be overtaken by inquisitive analysis. But a museum's purpose, whether for housing historical artefacts or artworks, was essentially to be a contemplative space to help enable thoughts on the objects within. And there lies the conundrum. Just as Durand-Ruel found with the salon, with its random and selective nature, the museum as bearer of national interest also has selective qualities in what is accepted, owned and put on view. Whether a private museum or national museum, for the populace many works are permanently not on view, sheer volume accumulated and space giving precedence to certain items. But something else occurred outside of this insular model of the museum thanks to Durand-Ruel and others of his ilk back in the mid-1800s, who, on the back of the salon and its selection processes, were quick to see the potential for tooting the horn of newer or different from the norm artists by giving them stipends and support. And this parallel was to be taken further with the rise of the commercial gallery. And the value of art took on a completely different meaning. The idea that art had a value outside of product consumption was first pondered by Marx, who looked at its meaning in a separate way from production-based needs. His thoughts were that yes, art has a wide benefit, but a value separate from necessity, and also separate from product remuneration or profit. Yet today we see just that, art as commodity. It has certainly become a fetishised object, even though the name art did not exist in many cultures centuries ago. The Egyptians saw it as part and parcel of communication. This has been a process centuries in the making, even before Marx was thinking about it. In societies that were closed way before intersocietal trade, art was a form of gift-giving, a way of bringing community together. It went on to have other meanings in religion, and it also bore reference to status and therefore had value. So art has always historically had a link to some sort of symbolic value. Yet now art's value is tied within its uniqueness, always held inherent in critical discussion, accolades and ever more truculently managed hype. If you look in any art publication of merit, the lead articles on artists' work are little more than a precursor to highlight the next show or to promote. Enter the critics into this new world. Now they did not occur overnight either. This was a process born on the thinking of people like Ruskin, on the back of the Enlightenment, Their discourse later evolved into ideas drawing on psychological and philosophical thinking, determining the reasons behind aesthetics. And as aesthetics changed, so too did the critical theory. So as with modern production, fueled by mass consumption, with every product reinventing into nuances of itself, churning out choice, yet with not much difference, art's worth followed a similar thread. In having to place value on things by their scarcity, a scarcity either through physical uniqueness or uniqueness through price, sometimes both. Things are being done again differently all the time within production. This could be seen in terms of product pricing and value of a produced thing. However, as Marx suggested, when art is created outside of the framework of necessities, it finds itself in a unique space. In becoming an object that is non-essential, yet also new in terms of understanding it, only when it is made physical does it become a complexity of both, and its worth caught up in that. Gift-giving of old was a way to give something of yourself, and at the same time not being beholden to the gift-giver. However, apply this idea to how art is seen and valued, and you can easily see the comfort zone of many with regard to any new horizons in art. It could be argued critics have a job or even a duty to interpret empirically on the evidence through their opinions in order for this discourse on art to reach full democratic fruition. This is why critics are important in our understanding of art, giving us a base to make our own informed judgments about what is produced. And of course, the more you immerse yourself in art, the more informed you may become with your gut feelings. But a bit like doing an IQ test in non-verbal reasoning, you can assimilate the overall semiotics in question, but the test doesn't necessarily mean anything other than a quickness in processing visual logic. It is still about the personal interpretation. For critics, however, this is not the integral part of that equation. Critics really only came to be of relevance once the emphasis of religious and absolute monarchical patronage had passed. They then became the soothsayers of what art was about, and their thinking had to be based on something empirically evident so as to back up their opinions. This is how the difference between art historians and critics came about, as historians see and rhetorize about art in the context of an art historical narrative. They offer art historical pinpoints. Critics, however, base their opinions from a current, personal view that is informed by history, whatever the era of art in question. Doesn't always happen, of course, and money and the politics of the art market, more often than not, can cast a long shadow over the proceedings. Value stems from rarity. For example, there are only 36 known Van Eycks in the public domain that are not in museum strongholds or on the walls. This creates a bubble of value for the art on the open circuit, with auction houses providing the other important factor, provenance. This has been the main reason for artworks steadily reaching, some would say, scandalous prices over the last 50 years, not least because at auction the prestige of the previous owner has the very real potential to create a certain kind of demand and hike in price. The prestige of gambling at its most affluent, this type of activity buoys the recorded prices of works not held in public collections, something that is desirable yet also a burden, as human greed will always be a part of that driving factor. Organised crime sees artwork in this light, pound for pound, relatively easy to heist, and has its use as collateral. Much like gold, it is out of the commerce system, yet still retains its relative value. Within the commodification era, art has been given rarefied status, a place to hedge your bets. In the expensive echelons of the art market, some works are bought and placed in vaults or houses, never to be seen, but to remain an asset, an assurance of wealth. Prices have rocketed since the World Wars. An artist dying also creates that rarity of work, hence Van Gogh's Sunflowers, among others, going at an astronomical price. It is not uncommon these days for collectors and dealers in art, buying pieces to watch them increase in value over a 10-year period, only to flip them for profit. This is the conundrum that sees art as a tool for profit, sold as commodity, hand in hand with the artist as a brand name. A certain area of the art market has been created, essentially a model that is followed throughout the art fairs of today. With roots in 1920s New York Armory Show or the Venice Biennale and exposition type fairs popular of fin de siècle 1800s, these have all grown into fully fledged static and travelling circuses of art marketing. Be they 1990s Frieze or Art Basel Miami Beach or Art Basel Hong Kong, or smaller concerns like the Affordable Art Fair, the model is to sell, be that widely or to appropriate collectors. Buying and collecting art has historically been a culture built on gentlemen's agreements. Many galleries didn't or still don't have a contract for their artists to sign, only a loose agreement. This leaving many artists free to wander onto the next best offer, true, but also leaving them open and vulnerable, especially if in the eyes of the gallery their expected creative paths do not follow the gallerist's vision. The artist can be dropped at short notice. Viewed by many as a commodity and the artist is essentially a brand, for many galleries it is a fine line trodden, a relationship that is usually nurturing, the gallerist dealing in a specific kind of art, and also a belief in the work of the artist. The difference is important as this pivotal chasm began to emerge around the time of the decline of monarchy and the rise of the middle class, buoyed on the profits of industrialisation. And the last bastion of historical institutional credibility, the Art Museum. They too are drawn into this. Institutions historically seen as open to all, on average each visitor costs them $50. Entrance fees are $15 to $20. They make a profit from donors, so they are courted by the board members, and hopefully any donors with additional agendas do not gain too much sway on what happens within the museum. Donors are extremely important. Donors can also have agendas. The board of a museum needs to be strong to keep a hold on the direction of the collection. As an example, the collector who bought Munch's Scream for an astronomical price, in the next few days it was on show in the Met. This is a huge status and philanthropic thing for the donor, but not necessarily the right work for the museum. Museums' other income options are blockbuster exhibitions. Similar scenario, not necessarily the right direction in choice of work on show. For example, there was a few years ago a spate of visitor participation art that almost had a theme park ride quality to it. For example, Karsten Holler's test site in the Turbine Hall, Tate. Sundays and Saturdays were full for the experience, but not necessarily for experiencing the art. A good art, bad art question, but it brought people in. This alters the vision and overall direction of the museum's collection, and so its art purchased and shown. The area of public art outside of the museum or gallery space also transcends into another space, corporate. This art can be sourced via companies that specialise in realising public and corporate art commissions. And so the artist's work, in liaison with and sometimes alongside production of the artwork required, this can incorporate, adding to the artist's concept or ideas stemming from their practice, the architectural and standards required for installation and the ongoing functional aspect of artwork used in public or corporate domains. Local and global commissions alike, the rarity of the artwork is usually one-off unique, and so the CV of artwork proven to be successful in these domains depends on the client, and so the client's reputation and influence. The bigger the project, the usually more influential and louder it shouts. And with the general media also focusing on the price of art as more interesting content than the work itself, unless shocking of course, this can add to the value of art as being seen purely by its price tag. Art, be it classical, modern or contemporary, all started to hinge on a somewhat cynical or glossed over money-fueled world of the art market, and through the combinations laid out here, it became much more about these factors and less about the art. So the wider aspect when looking at local, continental and international art, especially from the point of contemporary art, and with contemporary many stemming from a European legacy of recognised art as opposed to older art, which is the stuff of old masters, in mainly European terms, or the traditional folksy art of pretty much the rest of the world. Contemporary art is, because of this relative newness and by default in a global market, already ratcheted up to the realms of international art, local or even the broader term continental art, if it is contemporary, has to reach this international level of acceptance or requirement, a benchmark.